I mean, this is serious business, educating children. And so educating any child. And so I think you have to be careful that you don't just decide I'm just going to do 3 subjects every year. I mean, a transition is one thing, but your children do need more than those 3 things.
Welcome to Classical Etc. You're in the studio with Memoria Press.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Classical Etc. I'm Jessica Gardner, and I am here today with Paul Schaefer, Tanya Charlton, and Martin Cothran. How is everybody?
Good.
Cold.
Doing okay?
I'm cold.
Cold.
Yes. It is January when we are recording this.
In Kentucky.
Single digits. And even though we're just turning second semester of the school year, this is the time that Memoria Press families are thinking about next year. This is the time of year we get a lot of questions about curriculum. And today we're going to answer one of those common questions: are grade packages? How to do it, what you can include, what you can skip, and how to feel confident making those decisions. I'm excited to talk about it. We're going to learn a lot. I'm going to learn a lot. But before we dive in, as always, what are we reading? And I'm going to start with Paul.
Oh.
Because yesterday you completely destroyed one of my favorite authors.
Paul.
More Tools.
Oh, you did not.
You did.
Gracious.
You did not.
I
Do you
heard
wanna
this
tell me
today
about
too. That you didn't like Gentleman and this Moscow. always comes up.
Are you serious?
No, okay, let me clarify. Every time somebody wants to speak to me of him,
Is that a lot, Paul?
it actually has happened a lot in this office.
That's because
I wonder why that is.
He's such a good author.
It is that is what is said, right? Like the expectations get very, very high of this author. And I've read Gentleman in Moscow, I've read The Lincoln Highway, and I've read
Rules of Civility.
And every single one of them, I thought, I don't regret reading that, but I also wouldn't like raise it to the level that everybody else is raising it. And so it's just, does
that say more about the book or about Paul?
No. I think it has to do with the expectations that are being set. So for I would have no problem telling somebody, yeah, it's a good book. If you're looking for something good, modern to read, that's decent, sure, read it. But if your expectation is coming from people involved in the classical movement that are looking for really good books, and so it's highly recommended. No, it doesn't rise to the level of Tolstoy or Dickens or anything like that. But that's the way it was talked about to me. So
I think that he is he is at the top of my contemporary authors list.
Same here.
I'd say he's in my top 3. If somebody said, who's your favorite contemporary writer, he would definitely be in the running. Yeah. So I'm going to disagree.
I don't feel like I need to have a favorite contemporary author. So I that's why Martin once recommended to me that I ought not to read a book unless the author's been dead for 50 years.
Yes, well, Martin recommends a lot of things that he then does not actually put into his own life.
Well, right, but I think this was one case where he's not living up to it, but I like to live up to that because it feeds my soul.
But you love Jayber Crow. You love Jayber Crow.
I do. It's a rare book, and this was. I was told this was gonna blow my world. It was gonna be great. And I read Gentleman in Moscow, and it was a nice book, but it just wasn't. My expectation. I should have just gone into it for entertainment rather than great ideas. But I go into every book looking for great ideas when it gets recommended to me by certain people, and it just wasn't there.
So what are the great ideas you're reading now?
Well,
better be good.
Getting back into War and Peace, but I actually brought. I thought a little prop was helpful. So. Martin, because he gave me a used book for the book exchange.
Yes, he did.
He came by my desk the other day and he gave me a new book, which he's mentioned on this podcast already, Sharpe's Tiger. And so I'm excited about this book. And I think this will be a nice pleasure reading, but not great ideas book. And so my expectations are properly set here. And so I'm excited for this one.
What's the full title?
Am I supposed to read all of this?
You read all of this.
Sharpe's Tiger. in which Richard Sharp avoids Sergeant Obadiah Hawkswill and endeavors to rescue a British officer from under the nose of the Tipu of Mysore.
How can you resist that? Yeah.
That's not going on my reading list.
Well, and this up here it says the siege of Seringapatam. Seringapatam in 1799.
Wow.
So
how do you find this stuff? You find the most obscure things.
I'm trying to remember why I chose to. I listened to the book, and it's I forget the name of the narrator, but he's just perfect for this book. So the Audible is very good on this.
Ooh.
But Bernard Cornwell has been called the greatest historical novelist writing, and he's still writing. And this was so popular that there are now 22 in the series.
Oh
and
it's
so there's
this
more.
The first one?
Yes, it's the first in chronology, although it's not the first he wrote, somebody told me. But I just love this book. I was completely captured by it. It is really well written. It's a setting I love, which is British India. I really, that's an interesting time period. I've read a lot of books that are set in that period. And so I guess that's I can't remember why I decided to read it, but I've read two of them. It is a staple on British television. There's a Sean Bean plays Sharp in the British series. You can find it streaming. I watched the first episode, and it just didn't have the magnitude of the book. So,
well, no matter what Martin says, I'm keeping my expectations in the field of entertainment, pleasure reading, not great ideas reading.
I dare you not to like that book.
I look forward to it. I still haven't read that used book you gave me, but I look forward to that too.
He's complaining that book he hasn't even read.
Well, it's just he's complaining because it was ugly and used, and you didn't take the time to go out and buy him a Christmas present.
Why?
You literally the night before
weeks in used bookstores looking for that book for him.
No, you did not.
Well, okay.
Martin, what are you reading these days?
Well, because just to avoid having to say the same thing over again, one of the authors I just love, and this is one of these books that my wife and I listen to, like when we're going to visit our kids in Lexington or something. We've got an hour on the road, which is. Where'd it go? I just had it up here. I don't know where it went. and this is I'm doing what
you're Googling.
Tanya did.
That's right.
Okay, it's by Rick Bragg. Where I Come From. Rick Bragg he's a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, but he always wrote feature pieces. If you get a copy of Southern Living magazine, he writes the column right at the end, a very short columm.
Is he still
Southern
doing
Living.
that?
Yes, he is. And so I read one or two of those. I thought, who is this guy? He's Southern.
You and I read a book by him.
We did.
Because we talked about it.
Yeah, I can't remember what it is. But he's a Southerner, and he writes as a Southerner, and there's all that metaphorical, poetic language, and everything I think he writes, I have just absolutely loved.
He's a good writer.
There's a book called My Southern Journey, and it's a lot of his writings are just collections of his essays he's written for different magazines. My Southern Journey. If you want to know what the South, the American South is, read the introductory essay in My Southern Journey. And
or read Flannery O'Connor. Or Eudora
That's a little
Welty.
different angle on things.
Or Faulkner.
But my parents were both from the South. My mother was from Georgia. My dad was from South Carolina. And so these are my people. And he writes about Southerners and Southern life and Southern food. And it's just totally compelling. He has a book about his mother's cooking. And it's called My Mama's Kitchen. And he has a bunch of recipes, and each recipe there's a story behind it, a family story. So it's a whole chapter, and so it's fun to read the story. They're like all of his stories, and then he's got the recipe, and he tells how his mother, he says, well, Mom, how exactly how much salt? Well, just a pinch, just a dab, that was his mother's language. So he preserves all that, and I've made a couple of the recipes, and they're great. I love Southern cooking.
How about you, Tanya?
Well, I'm going to repeat myself for the next 6 months. I'm reading War and Peace.
Okay, let's just
move on.
Put this discussion under
Here's
wraps.
The thing is, I can't read anything else right now because we're going to meet about it next week. And I still have 200 pages to go in the part that we're going to talk about next week. So I've got to read The Door in the Wall because we're going to, Dana and Lee and I are going to work on The Door in the Wall. So I do have to do that, but it's just got to be just War and Peace for me right now, which I just read. I don't know. Are you finished with volume 2?
No.
Have you read the conversation between Pierre and Prince Andre about God when Andre says, or when...
I did 15 years ago, but I haven't recently.
It's just so good. It's brilliant. So get there.
I'm working on it.
It's really, that is
the funny thing about Tolstoy is he was not Orthodox. He was not an Orthodox Christian. He was almost a Freemason or something. But his novels rise above that.
Pierre has
Orthodox
become a Mason. He's not going like to a church. He's literally joined the Masons.
Yes.
And Andre is living. We don't need to talk about it. We don't need to talk about it.
There's a lot of characters in his novels who are Masons, and they're always very positively portrayed. He clearly admires them, and so in that inevitable comparison between Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, Tolstoy writes better Christian novels, I think, than Dostoevsky even, but his actual theology that the beliefs he holds to are not as orthodox as Dostoevsky. Dostoevsky is very orthodox in his beliefs. But somehow, again, his novels rise above his theological limitations. It's really amazing.
He makes orthodox theological points.
Yes.
When Levin goes to confession and Anna there's really, he portrays the faith beautifully, right? And Kitty's ability to tend to the dying, and he, as an agnostic, he has no idea how to handle that, right? There's a lot of good points that he makes about the faith.
And about how
himself.
Seeing Christ in somebody is more powerful than any argument, and that Kitty serves that role, I think.
That's
Anna
beautiful.
Karenina.
What are you reading?
Last night, I just started a book I've read probably 4 times, Hind's Feet on High Places. Have you ever heard about it?
I have heard of that.
It's beautiful. It's an allegory by Hannah Hennard. She wrote a couple books I think it's from the 60s.
It's older.
It is older. It's beautiful.
It's one of those ones that my wife has on the shelf, and I have no idea what it's about.
Oh, it's so good. I try to read it once a year. It's short. It's probably not even 100 pages. So,
wow.
Time to revisit.
That's your book that you read over and over. Shane's was the Iliad.
Oh.
Was it Homer he reads every year?
I feel like he had more than one that he read every year.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a book I reread every year.
I try to read A Severe Mercy too.
Oh gosh, that's good.
It'll gut you.
Yes. Yes, it will. Very beautiful though.
Well, speaking of beautiful, our materials here at the press, specifically our grade packages, is what we're going to discuss today. And I'm excited about it because we get a lot of questions this time of year about how to do it, how to put them together. And I want to start with you, Tanya, because you field these questions a lot and you walked your students, your children, through Memoria Press in its beginning. So you had to make these decisions for your own children. When you hear a question from a parent about, okay, I'm approaching a grade level for my student, what are their common concerns and where do you begin?
Placement is a common concern because their students don't necessarily place into an entire core package.
Okay.
So we have to talk about that. You know, our CSRs spend a lot of time just walking people through student by student and subject by subject. Another common concern is how many books are in a package. It can be overwhelming. It looks overwhelming. It's certainly, I was just fielding complaints from our editors today because the changes that we continue to make their lives difficult. But it's because it's a living, breathing organism, and it is all coming out of our classrooms. Right now, they're right outside the door using the curriculum and trying to figure out, what it needs to be. And we have added things that used to not be there.
Okay.
That we're not necessarily even using consistently in our classrooms, like the Little American History supplemental sets. Those weren't there when I was educating my children, but I would have had them in a library for them to read. And they're in all our classrooms, but it really is just up to our students to read them. The science and enrichment books, our teachers don't really get to those at all. And we really only added those sets because the homeschool market wanted more science than we were doing in K-2. So but that doesn't mean, that you need to buy all of that or have all of that. I always said, if you've got time, as a homeschooler, if you've got extra time in your week, and you want to do more, say the topic is how a plant grows, and you want to do more, why not just go to the library and find some picture books on photosynthesis that are on your child's grade level and use that as a great excuse for an outing. But then somebody recently, when I said that, said, well, you have to be so careful in libraries now, because the content of the children's books has gotten ridiculous and political. And so, where I used to just be able to turn my children loose, they can't do that now. They have to just stay right there and make sure the book is something that they would want their child to read. So that's sad. That's a sad thing. I think those are the major questions: is how to get it all done, and placement. Where does my child need to start, especially if they're starting later?
So you do have to balance. I mean, I know my wife struggled, and this is before we had a lot of the material we have now, because we were developing all that stuff when my kids were young. But you have to balance that fitting things to your child with fitting the child to something outside themselves, which they need to learn how to do also. I mean, you can't totally tailor a curriculum totally to your child. And so maybe, if the math is just too hard, it's beyond them, maybe you need the one before to prep for that. And it's always,
But it doesn't mean don't do math.
It doesn't mean don't do math. Right. Some people, they want to cater to their children's interests all the time. That's not good for children ultimately. They need to know that they are going to face some difficult things in life that they don't want to deal with, and they need to learn how to deal with them. But you do try to calibrate what you're teaching them to where they are. And of course, if they are struggling, don't push them forward in something they're really not capable of doing. Put them back. And even if they've had that part before, have them do it again. It's not that big a deal. And homeschoolers always have an inferiority complex about things, and they think, and maybe it's not that way anymore. But I remember my wife was always thinking, I should just put them back in school because they're not going to be at the same level as the other. Well, it turned out it was exactly the opposite. But
I do think we have more security now. I think as homeschoolers, I think we do believe that we are doing a better job.
And one thing I would say is, like, as far as what we've developed for the homeschooler, I remember sitting in Mrs. Lowe's classroom, and she was assigning that we would go home and make flashcards. And it was actually a source of great embarrassment when my mother found all my flashcards a few years ago, because my chicken scratch handwriting back then, it was horrible. But now we have flashcards that people can buy, right, instead of having the child make their own. Because why? I mean, as a child, you make your own. You're always making spelling errors, and so what you're reinforcing is, unless you're very diligent about it, is going to be mistaken. But there is actually, if you can enforce the child to copy it properly, there is a learning kind like there's additional learning done by them making it themselves.
And again, I think that depends on the child. You know, if they're not paying any attention if they're just copying and paying no attention at all, they're not really learning the meaning of a word.
And so is it worth your time to just have those flashcards provided for you versus making them yourself? Because I mean, I've talked to so many parents at homeschool conventions, like, do I really need them? Well, we can take them out of the package. That's fine. It's totally up to you. But if you want this added resource, it's here for you.
Yes, and I would have killed for them because my kids did such an awful job on flashcards. And I would have loved to have had that resource without having to use their homemade flashcards that were awful. But then in the classes that I taught, some of the girls had beautiful, mainly girls, beautiful flashcards with flowers and borders. And they were really nice. And I thought I could have used these at home. But so it really does
and
depend.
The boy was really smart. He'd get the girl next to him to do his for him. So
and they'd be beautiful.
And most boys aren't that smart.
No, they aren't.
But we've added things too, like for Christian studies, we added copybooks for the scripture verses that they memorized because our teachers were having our students write those verses in just a regular notebook. And they thought it would be nicer for them to have the verse beside them so that they, again, spell everything correctly. And so we've added those that are really not necessary. They are supplemental, but it does make the teacher's life easier just to be able to say, do this in your copybook instead of get out a sheet of paper. And now I've got to find the verse in the Bible that you need to copy.
Yeah.
So a lot of this stuff is just really up to your personal situation. And I think, honestly, you were talking about dealing with the student, but I think a lot of the questions, I think we hear just as many questions from parents, teachers, either in schools or homeschools, who are they're the ones that are struggling. The student's not really the one struggling. The parent is struggling with getting it done and how to organize it.
I think
and
that's true, yeah.
how to teach it and some insecurity. Am I teaching this in the right way? And so I do think that there's a learning curve. And I wouldn't always, especially for schools, I would not recommend doing like we're changing every single subject all at once, and the teachers have to learn everything new. But we have a lot of homeschoolers who do that, and they do struggle at the beginning. But we've got on our forum, they really help each other. And so, they've come up with ideas that I never would have thought of, like staggering your start. Just start one subject per student and add a subject a week, or start one student. Start your young student.
Or your older student.
Or your older.
Do that for a week and then.
Right. And so there's all kinds of help where they've helped us. A lot of the new things that we've developed have been because we have listened to their feedback. And they have helped us, school teachers as well as homeschoolers. And we get a lot of that information on the forum. And they know that we are listening, I hope, and that we're going to help them. But a big change that we made was dropping a full comprehensive English grammar program. So that did simplify things because we recognized that we were when I taught the first year, I was spending an hour a day teaching Latin and an hour a day teaching English grammar. And it was too much. It was the same thing, really. And so when we figured that out, that really freed up
and
some
consolidated.
Time. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So if I was a homeschool parent looking at, say, beginning grade, the 6th grade package or any package, what would you say to help me feel more free to what is essential, to know what's essential, and what can I say, you know what, we're going to do that a different way or a different year? We get that question a lot. What do I have to have so that I know that my child won't be behind in 7th grade,
Right.
or if they feel like there's kind of a turning point here, that's a big year, I don't want to leave anything out. What's your advice on that?
Who are you asking? Any of us?
Mhm.
I feel like I've talked a lot.
Well, I would say there's not a good way to answer that in a broad general way, right? Like every grade is going to have its particular things that are being covered, right? So do you really need to spend a year, let's say you're transitioning in, I guess that would be the 6th grade year, with birds in the history of medicine. Do you really need to spend a year doing that stuff? It's good. It's worthwhile. It ought to be done. But if you're transitioning in Memoria Press in that year and you're sitting here going, we're adding Latin in, we haven't done Latin before, now I feel like we're two levels behind in composition, and, okay, I've got all this other stuff. You might just not do that science for a year because the next year you'll be able to add it in, and there is a danger there if you get complacent of like, I don't need to do this subject, right? No, you need to, if you have a sort of a staged sort of plan of like, this year we're going to cut out, a subject or two that is not, like, you have to do physical science to be ready for biology and chemistry and physics, really. You can't cut that out. But in the earlier years, you could, right?
Right. You could even just give your child the birds book to read,
right,
and the medicine.
Do the work.
Or
right.
you can also use the summer for some of those things, right?
Yes. Yep.
I mean, studying birds, like right now, there's no nature going on. It is 12 degrees outside. Nothing is happening. They've all gone south for the winter. So why wouldn't you do birds in the summer when you can put a bird feeder out there?
Or trees.
Well, my wife always did. Or trees when they actually have leaves and this sort of thing. So some of those things can, you could just do the rest of the stuff and then do the nature study.
But as far as what is necessary in the grammar school, if you're going to do a classical education, you need to be doing some Latin.
Okay.
You got to do math.
Literature.
Oh, lit, for sure.
Latin, math, and literature. You can do nothing else, do Latin, math, and
you can
read
always,
a bunch of stuff.
if you want to include Christian studies, for us, Christian studies is an academic subject. And so you can skip that and just do your Christian studies together as a family, whatever you choose to do, and skip it as an academic subject. I wouldn't skip it forever as an academic subject because I think it's one of the most valuable things
knowledge
that we
is
have.
important.
That knowledge is, and we are becoming illiterate about, with biblically.
Like the context.
And I think this is really important. I think my son's Christian studies years with Cheryl Lowe were really essential for them to know what's in the Bible, where it is. Before then, they start actually building their faith. I think that having that knowledge was a huge gift.
Yeah, and I went to Christian schools growing up in California, where they have nature all year, by the way. I went to Christian schools and mostly Missouri Synod Lutheran schools, and I didn't realize till much later in life, you're making this point about the importance of Christian studies.
Right.
I didn't realize till much later in life the influence that had on me. The things that I knew because we talked about them and we memorized the 10 Commandments and we memorized certain Bible verses and we had a very basic theological understanding that was just ingrained. And that is so important. I don't know what it would be like to not have had that and try to learn that later. That would be a weird experience. So I do think that is fundamentally important. And I do think making it a family studies grade, just take where one of them is in the Christian studies program and have all of them
do it all
be
together.
Yeah, that's the other thing is there's certain things that you can do together. Now, you can't do it with Latin and you can't do it with math. Those are systematic subjects. But other subjects you can adjust between grades up 2 or 3 grades and just have them. if they're close enough, have them all do the same history together. Have them do the same. Sometimes you can do that with literature. Sometimes you can't. But you can find something in the middle of where they are and just go up the grades that way and have them all do the same year of that. Sometimes that's what you've got to do, and it works.
Let me ask you a question. Do you think logic's essential?
Well, I think that by the time you get to a stage that you are able to learn logic, which is really only in high school,
right?
I think it's much easier. You should have gotten all those basic things up to that point. I do think you need to do it before you get out of high school, definitely. That is, I mean, to me, it's very much a follow on to the critical thinking skills training you're getting in grammar and math. Logic is the next step after that.
That's helpful. And one of my takeaways is math, Latin, and literature are the essentials. And then outside of that, as a homeschooler, I can feel empowered to just kind of look at the arc of our year, the arc of the family. Are there kids in similar grade ranges? And what do we want to do with our summers or our breaks or our family time? And just feel free to make it work with our lives.
But I think
and
also
include the essentials.
You've got to, I mean, this is serious business, educating children. And so educating any child. And so I think you have to be careful that you don't just decide I'm just going to do 3 subjects every year. I mean, a transition is one thing, but your children do need more than those 3 things.
Right. And in a homeschool setting, you really can get stuff done, I mean, depending on the child, more quickly than in a school setting, right? Because you just need that one child to get it and off you go. And so, I mean, the main thing that I would say is that I really want people to know that we will help you customize this for your child. Just because we say, here's first grade, here's second grade, here's third grade, doesn't mean that we expect that everybody's doing, when they're doing third grade, they're doing exactly those things.
That's right.
But that, either via phone call, email, in person at a convention, whatever it is, we're happy to walk through it with you subject by subject, and you let us know where your child is, and we'll help place you there. And then we can understand that you where you feel you're maxing out, right? And help you through
that. School ought to take, depending on the age of the child, but say an older grammar school student or a high school student, they should be spending 5 or 6 hours a day on schoolwork, because what else are they doing? They need to be working hard.
And the manuals that come in our packages are so clear and helpful with every subject.
I hope
so. And I think, I think they are, with how much, just an average for how to fit this in and the hours throughout the day, where to put everything.
Right.
So it's,
But you don't want to, it's just a fine line. Like at what point does it become overwhelming? And if it does, then what's wrong?
Can I address a question that I get frequently in the booth at a conference, for example, and that is Latin. Okay, so you have a family and they're just starting Latin, and they've got a 6th grader and a 5th grader and a 3rd grader. And they think they have to teach each one using a different program or something. And I almost always tell them, look, take all 3 of them and just start with Latina Christiana. And then next year, you go on to the next one. And so that you have enough time still, even with a 6th grader, right?
You've got plenty of time.
You've got plenty of time. And so doing things, because I said before, you can't do that with math and Latin. And you can do it with Latin if they're all starting, then you can dictate what happens thereafter. Just put them all in the same program, do the same thing. It's going to be really easy for the 6th grader. That's okay.
Right, but that's about the last year I would do that.
Yes, I would say, right. If it's a 7th grader, I'm thinking maybe you want to start with
go
first
ahead
form
and
or
move
something.
on to first form. But that child should be able to be more independent anyway, and then you're going to spend your time in Latino with the younger students.
That's right.
I will say that the families I've seen that have started with their oldest child in kindergarten are very happy just going 1 year to the next.
Right.
Because it really...
It doesn't change a lot.
It doesn't, and it takes away a huge weight of deciding, like, what are we going to do this next year, right?
Sure.
And
that was huge for me.
yeah,
Once I found Cheryl Lowe and didn't have to think about that anymore, it was a huge relief. Everybody else was running around trying to figure their stuff out, and I was just going to do whatever she said. And it was a burden lifted.
And that's our hope with the curriculum packages.
Yes,
it's a burden lifted. It's
but the funny thing is there's two kinds of homeschoolers. All right. There's the homeschoolers who want everything prepackaged and regimented, and that's good. They like that. There's the other ones who are just creative and they want it. They see this program over here and they see that program over there. And I'd be willing to bet that the person who stays on task with a regular structured curriculum probably gets more done than the person who is spending so much of their time looking for other stuff rather than teaching.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know. That's my theory.
But I would say that kind of harkening back to what Tanya was saying about the science and enrichment sets and things. I know my mother spent so much time in trying to make sure that what was available at home, that we had plenty of things available at home to occupy us, and making sure every single one of those things was going to contribute towards our education in some way, shape, or form. And so what you know, when you were bored, I mean, you talk about the history books you read, you know, as a kid, right? Like when you're bored, what do? You'd go read, you know, and that I think paid dividends for me. Because it just put me in this sort of orientation of I can always learn, and that was huge.
Yeah.
They had to keep you busy. You were a troubled child, right?
I'm sure I was.
Little Paul.
I'm sure I was a little terror.
Well. Ending with Little Paul. This has been a really good discussion. I learned a lot. Thank you for joining us. We hope it was encouraging as you think about grade packages. You can find more about our grade packages at memoriapress.com, and you can also order a free magazine there. We'll ship it to you, and all the great information is in there. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back soon.
Thank you for watching this episode of Classical Etc. Please consider liking or sharing this video or commenting below to let us know what you thought. This has been Classical Etc. with Memoria Press. We'll see you next time.